She didn't scream when she collapsed, that's what unsettled everyone, no panic, no cry for help, no weakness. Just a slow, deliberate fall onto cold Italian marble, as if even gravity had her permission. 600 of Manhattan's most powerful people stood frozen, the orchestra stopped mid-note, champagne glasses trembled in midair, flashbulbs ceased their relentless firing. And across the ballroom, through the crowd of Armani suits and Cartier necklaces, Richard Whitmore didn't move, he simply watched. His face betrayed nothing, not shock, not concern, not even curiosity, just calculation. Because if Eleanor Whitmore, 70 years old, worth $14.8 billion, commander of a business empire spanning 17 countries, died that night, he wouldn't be grieving, he would be inheriting. Paramedics flooded through the gilded doors within 4 minutes, the city's best cardiac team was already on standby, they always were when Eleanor attended public events. But as they worked, something else spread faster than medical intervention, whispers, someone said it could be a cardiac failure, she's 70, there's no successor, the board will fracture, Whitmore Global will be carved up within months. And in the far corner of the ballroom, Richard Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks with the precision of a man who had already run the numbers. He had mapped the transition plan years ago, war-gamed every scenario, built alliances in boardrooms across 3 continents. Without a direct heir, controlling shares would shift through family voting structures he had carefully positioned himself within. He wouldn't need to fight, he would simply wait. But here's the part no one in that ballroom understood, the part that would change everything. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't afraid of dying, she was afraid of disappearing. Because in the world she built, a world of hostile takeovers, proxy wars, and legacy destruction, if you leave no heir, you leave no defense. Your empire doesn't transition, it gets dismantled, sold for parts, erased, and before the year ended, Eleanor would make a decision so controversial, so biologically dangerous, so morally explosive. It would fracture her family, destabilize her board, divide global media, and gamble her life on one impossible outcome. At 70 years old, she would attempt to have a child, and the only man capable of making it possible was the one who opened her car door every morning. If you're drawn to stories where power turns personal, where legacy becomes war, and where the most dangerous inheritance isn't money, it's biology. Please, subscribe now, hit that notification bell, because this isn't a romance, it's a billion-dollar survival strategy, and it only gets darker from here. The Whitmore Global Impact Gala was the most anticipated event in New York City's social calendar. Politicians mingled with hedge fund royalty, foreign investors networked with media moguls, senators laughed with tech billionaires. Eleanor Whitmore owned the room the way monarchs own thrones. Her voice never shook, her posture never bent, her handshake could end careers or launch empires, until it didn't. When her body hit the marble, the sound wasn't loud, but the silence afterward was deafening. Paramedics rushed forward, but something else moved faster, the whispers. She's been working 18-hour days, the board's been pushing expansion into Southeast Asia, there's been talk of hostile acquisition attempts, stress would kill anyone at 70. And threading through it all, one phrase that made investors check their phones, there's no successor. Richard Whitmore stood perfectly still, an island of calm in the chaos. To anyone watching, he appeared concerned, appropriately worried, but his mind was already 3 moves ahead. Without Eleanor, the Whitmore empire, worth over $42 billion in total assets, would enter succession protocol. Family board voting, fiduciary review, shareholder confidence evaluation. He had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. Building relationships with key board members, cultivating media allies, positioning himself as the responsible choice, the safe hands. He wouldn't need to wage war, the infrastructure would simply recognize reality. Eleanor survived that night, barely, her cardiologist was direct, another episode like that would be fatal. Stress was the enemy, the empire was killing her, she had 2 choices, step down and watch everything she built be consumed by people who didn't understand her vision. Or find a way to secure succession on her terms. The first option was unthinkable, and the second was medically impossible, except it wasn't. 3 weeks after her collapse, Eleanor sat in a consultation room that didn't appear on any hospital directory. Dr. Samantha Chen was one of the world's leading reproductive endocrinologists. She had pioneered protocols that pushed biological boundaries, but even she hesitated. At 70, the risks are extraordinary, Dr. Chen said carefully. Cardiac strain during pregnancy could be fatal. Hormonal treatments at your age could trigger catastrophic responses, and even with optimal conditions, success rates are. What are the success rates? Eleanor interrupted. With advanced IVF protocols, donor eggs, hormonal preparation, perhaps 12 to 15%, maybe. And with optimal biological compatibility, which increases viability significantly, perhaps 30%. Eleanor leaned forward. Then test my immediate circle, test everyone with regular access. What Dr. Chen found 2 weeks later was statistically unusual. Among the 27 individuals tested, assistants, security detail, executive staff, one profile showed exceptional compatibility markers. Not from a donor database, but from someone within Eleanor's immediate circle, Daniel Reyes, her driver. Daniel had driven Eleanor for 4 years, former Royal Marines, decorated service in hostile territories. He had transitioned to private security, then executive protection, then eventually to Eleanor's personal detail. Disciplined, observant, quiet, and invisible in the way truly competent people are, until he was summoned to Eleanor's penthouse at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. The meeting wasn't in her office, it was in her private study, the room where she made decisions that couldn't appear on corporate minutes. She didn't soften the proposal, didn't wrap it in pleasantries. Eleanor Whitmore had spent 50 years in boardrooms. She spoke in terms of strategy, not emotion. Advanced testing has identified you as an optimal biological match for a medically viable pregnancy, she said, watching his face carefully. This is not romantic, it's not emotional, it's structural. Daniel said nothing, waiting. I need a legal heir, Eleanor continued, someone who cannot be challenged, removed, or bypassed through corporate maneuvering. A biological successor with ironclad legal standing, she laid it out with clinical precision. Number 1, he would assist in conceiving a legal heir through medical protocols. Number 2, absolute confidentiality enforced by legal instruments that would destroy anyone who broke silence. Number 3, a trust securing his family's future, education, medical care, housing, for 3 generations. Number 4, guardianship authority with legal power of attorney if Eleanor died before the child reached majority. Number 5, no public acknowledgement of paternity unless Eleanor determined it strategically necessary. Daniel felt the weight of it instantly. This wasn't about money, this wasn't even about legacy. It was about stepping into a battlefield disguised as a nursery. Why me? He asked quietly. Eleanor's answer was simple and direct. Because you've seen combat, you understand asymmetric warfare, you don't panic under pressure, and in 4 years, you've never once tried to leverage your position for personal gain. Above all, you're loyal, and you don't scare easily. Daniel looked at the woman who had built an empire from inherited wealth and ruthless intelligence. She wasn't asking for a favor, she was recruiting a soldier for the most dangerous operation of her life. He thought about his daughter, 8 years old, bright, deserving of opportunities he couldn't provide on a driver's salary. He thought about the world Eleanor was describing, the knives that would come out, the legal battles, the media storms, then he thought about something else. If Eleanor died before securing succession, her empire wouldn't transition smoothly, it would be torn apart. And everyone in her orbit, including him, would be collateral damage. What happens if you don't survive? He asked. Then you become the most important person in my child's life, Eleanor said, and the legal guardian of a $42 billion inheritance. Daniel nodded slowly. When do we start? Secrets don't survive Manhattan, not when billions are at stake. 3 weeks into the medical protocols, someone leaked. One photograph, taken through a telephoto lens, Eleanor entering a reproductive medicine clinic in an unmarked vehicle. Within 6 hours, the story exploded. Billionaire matriarch at 70 attempts pregnancy, Whitmore succession crisis, desperate or delusional? Who is the father? The media feeding frenzy was instantaneous. Cable news ran speculative panels, financial networks questioned her mental competency. Tabloids fabricated increasingly absurd theories. Whitmore Global's share price dropped 4% in a single trading session. Board members began receiving calls, concerned investors, nervous partners. Richard Whitmore called an emergency governance meeting. Publicly, he expressed concern for Eleanor's health and judgment. Privately, he began positioning legal arguments. If she died during treatment, he could argue cognitive instability, medical decision-making capacity, fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. He didn't need her to die immediately, he just needed her to fail, because failure would prove his argument. Eleanor Whitmore was no longer fit to command her empire. The board meeting was brutal. 7 members demanded Eleanor step down immediately, 4 supported her unconditionally, and 3 remained strategically silent. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed. "My medical decisions are irrelevant to operational governance," she said calmly. Whitmore Global posted record quarterly earnings. "Our expansion into emerging markets is ahead of schedule. Shareholder value has increased 19% year over year." "This isn't about performance," Richard interjected smoothly. "It's about stability, about confidence, about ensuring this company survives leadership transition." "I agree completely," Eleanor replied, "which is why I'm ensuring there will be a clear, legally unassailable successor." "A child?" Richard's voice carried just the right amount of concerned disbelief. "Eleanor, even if this succeeds, and medical experts say the odds are catastrophically low, you're creating uncertainty, not clarity." "I'm creating certainty," Eleanor countered, "a direct biological heir with absolute legal standing, no ambiguity, no board votes, no family disputes." The room went silent, because everyone understood what she was really saying. Without a direct heir, succession would be contested. With one, Richard's carefully constructed path to power evaporated. The treatments were violent, hormones surged like storms through a 70-year-old body never designed to bear them. Eleanor's heart rhythm destabilized twice in the first month. The first time, she was admitted to a private cardiac wing under an alias, stabilized after 4 hours. The second time, her medical team recommended terminating the protocol immediately. "Your heart can't sustain this," Dr. Chen said bluntly. "We're pushing your system beyond safe parameters. Another arrhythmia could be fatal." Eleanor's response was immediate. "Continue, Eleanor. I didn't build a $42 billion empire by retreating when things got difficult." Dr. Chen stared at her patient, at the woman who refused to acknowledge biological reality. "This isn't a board meeting," she said quietly. "You can't negotiate with your cardiovascular system." "Then we adjust protocols, increase monitoring. I don't care what it costs," but what it cost was everything Eleanor had never been willing to spend. Privacy, dignity, control. She endured procedures that would break most people. Hormone injections that triggered mood dysregulation so severe she once threw a laptop across her penthouse study, physical examinations that felt like violations, constant monitoring, blood draws, cardiac telemetry, and through it all, Daniel Reyes remained. Not as a driver anymore, not as a something stranger, but more complicated, a biological partner in a clinical transaction that somehow felt more intimate than Eleanor had prepared for. They didn't speak about emotions, but late one night, after another round of treatments, Eleanor found him sitting in her study. "You should go home," she said. "You don't need to stay. My contract specifies 24-hour availability during critical operations," Daniel replied calmly. "This isn't a security detail," Eleanor said. "No," he agreed, "but it's more important." Eleanor studied him, this man who had agreed to something most people would consider insane. "Why did you really agree?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "My daughter, she's 8, brilliant, wants to be an engineer, and I'm raising her on a driver's salary with no real prospects beyond that." He looked directly at Eleanor. "You're offering her a future I could never provide, so whatever happens, whatever this costs, it's worth it." Eleanor nodded slowly. For the first time in decades, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: respect earned through shared risk. Weeks turned into months, the media storm continued, board tensions escalated, Richard built alliances and waited for medical failure. But Eleanor's body, against every probability, every medical prediction, every rational expectation, adapted. The pregnancy took. 9 months later, under armed security in a private wing of Manhattan Presbyterian that had been effectively purchased for the occasion, Eleanor Whitmore gave birth, against probability, against age, and against nature itself. The medical team that delivered the child had signed NDAs backed by 8-figure penalties, but word still leaked within hours, because this wasn't just a birth, it was a corporate earthquake. The legal team moved with military precision. Within 24 hours, the infant, a daughter Eleanor named Vivian, became the sole controlling heir of Whitmore Global Holdings. An irreversible trust structure locked governance protocols. Daniel Reyes was named legal guardian with full power of attorney if Eleanor died before Vivian reached majority. Succession challenges were legally neutered through instruments that would take years to even attempt to contest. Richard's path to inheritance dissolved instantly. He had spent 15 years positioning himself, building relationships, cultivating board support, waiting patiently, and in one biological event, it meant nothing. When he visited Eleanor's private recovery room, accompanied by security because private hospital wings have protocols, his composure was perfect. "Congratulations," he said smoothly. Eleanor, holding Vivian with a careful precision that betrayed her lack of maternal practice, simply nodded, "Thank you." "This changes the succession structure considerably," Richard continued. "That was the intention, of course," he said with a smile, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I imagine the board will have questions about long-term stability. A child can't run a corporation." "No," Eleanor agreed, "but a trust structure with clear governance protocols can ensure continuity until she can." Richard understood perfectly. He had lost, not permanently, because power structures are never truly permanent, but definitively enough that his timeline had been destroyed. But something unexpected happened in the months following Vivian's birth. Eleanor didn't die, but her heart, which doctors had predicted would fail under the strain, somehow stabilized. The woman who had been given months to live was not only surviving. She was thriving, stronger than she had been in years, as if having something worth protecting had given her body a reason to fight. And suddenly, Richard wasn't waiting for a funeral anymore. He was facing a future where Eleanor might live another decade, where Vivian would grow up with Eleanor's guidance, her strategic mind, her ruthless intelligence. Where the empire he'd coveted would pass to someone who carried Eleanor's literal DNA. The realization was chilling. He hadn't just lost an inheritance, he'd been replaced. 8 months after Vivian's birth, Eleanor stood in the nursery of her penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. The city glowed beneath her like a circuit board of power and money. Daniel stood near the window, holding Vivian with the careful competence of someone who had learned through necessity. Eleanor watched them both. "You understand, this isn't over," she said quietly. Daniel nodded without turning. Richard's regrouping. "He's not the only one." Eleanor moved to the window. "The board members who supported him haven't disappeared. They're watching, waiting for any sign of weakness." "What kind of sign?" Daniel asked. "Health complications, decision-making errors, anything that suggests I'm not fit to continue, or that Vivian's existence creates vulnerability rather than security." Daniel finally looked at her. "What kind of vulnerability?" Eleanor's expression was grim. "Heirs don't just inherit empires, Daniel, they become targets, leverage points, ways to manipulate the person who holds power." The weight of it settled between them. Vivian wasn't just an heir, she was a strategic weakness wrapped in biological certainty, and anyone who wanted to control Eleanor Whitmore now had a very specific pressure point. "You've thought about security protocols," Daniel said. "It wasn't a question, I've implemented them, but protocols have limits." "What are you really worried about?" Daniel asked. "Custody challenges, medical proxy battles, legal competency arguments, any number of vectors designed to separate me from control while appearing to protect Vivian's interests." "You think Richard will go that far?" "Richard absolutely would. I know him, and he'd frame it as concern for a child's welfare. The board would support him, media would portray me as an unstable elderly woman clinging to power." She turned to face Daniel directly. which is why you're not just a guardian on paper, you're the failsafe. Daniel understood immediately, if Eleanor was incapacitated, legally challenged, or removed from power, he would be the only thing standing between Vivian and people who would use her as a puppet to control a $42 billion empire. I'm a former Marine, Eleanor, not a corporate strategist. You're loyal, you understand asymmetric threats, and most importantly, you're the only person in this equation who doesn't benefit from betraying me. The truth of it was stark. Daniel had no claim to the Whitmore fortune beyond what Eleanor had structured, no board connections, no political aspirations. His only value was in protecting what Eleanor had created. Which made him both the perfect guardian, and the most dangerous liability if someone found a way to compromise him. 6 months later, the same ballroom where Eleanor had collapsed, the Whitmore Global Impact Gala, exactly 1 year after the night that changed everything. But this time, Eleanor doesn't collapse, she stands at the podium, 71 years old, looking stronger than she has in a decade. The speech is flawless, the performance perfect. She announces record earnings, new partnerships across 3 continents. A sustainability initiative that will reshape corporate responsibility standards. The room erupts in applause, but in the back, Richard Whitmore watches with an expression that reveals nothing. Later, as guests mingle, he approaches Eleanor quietly, away from cameras, away from witnesses. You've complicated things, he says softly. Eleanor smiles faintly. No, I secured them. Yeah, but for now, for long enough. Richard leans in slightly. Empires don't last forever, Eleanor, you know that better than anyone. They last as long as someone is willing to defend them, she said. And when you can't anymore. Eleanor's eyes are cold. I've ensured someone will. Across the room, Daniel stands near the exit, not in a driver's uniform anymore, in a suit that suggests something more, something undefined. He holds Vivian carefully, her presence at the gala a calculated statement. This child exists, this heir is real, this succession is irreversible. But as Daniel watches Eleanor navigate the room with practiced grace, he sees something others don't, the slight tremor in her left hand, the way she subtly grips the podium for balance during photos, the exhaustion hidden behind perfect makeup. Eleanor Whitmore is stronger than she was, but she's still 71, and time remains undefeated. As the orchestra begins again, the camera lingers on 3 faces, the billionaire who refused extinction, the child who changed succession law, and the man who now stands between them and a world hungry for control. Because empires don't fall quietly, they evolve. And the real war, the one fought not in boardrooms but in hospital rooms, custody hearings, and late-night legal maneuvers, has just begun. The screen fades to black, but the final shot isn't Eleanor, it's Vivian 1 year old, already worth more than most nations. Already the center of a conflict she'll spend her life navigating, the heir to everything, and the target of everyone.